Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Uma, and I'm an investor on the Flare Capital team. I'm really excited to welcome you here today for our 10th quarterly expert roundtable focused on generative AI in healthcare. And specifically, we're going to be discussing whether this is hype or here to stay. Generative AI has been the latest buzz in the tech and entrepreneurship world. But what does this mean for healthcare, an industry that has strict data regulations and where the cost of errors can be significant? Let me set the stage a little bit before we jump into the program with our speakers. What differentiates generative AI from other applications that we might be more familiar with is that it's creating wholly novel content from training data. OpenAI's ChatGPT has been a subject that's received a significant amount of attention over the past few weeks, and it continues to make headlines. ChatGPT actually surpassed 100 million users within the first 2 months. And just to put things into perspective, that is a faster rate of adoption than TikTok, it's a faster rate than Instagram, and it's a faster rate than Spotify. But generative AI has actually been around since 2014. The consumerization, the accessibility, and the ease of use has led to conversations around where else this technology can be used. The frenzy has actually spurred an intense arms race, with enterprises shifting corporate strategies to gain control over what they believe is a new infrastructure layer of the economy. Analysts are upgrading the stocks of companies that mention AI in their plans and punishing those with less successful AI product rollouts. Everything is up for disruption, but it's not clear who or where those winners might be. Excitement around the progress is justified, but so too is a reality check. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said that showing these tools to the world early, while still somewhat broken, is critical if we're going to have sufficient input and repeated efforts to get it right. We also need enough time for our institutions to figure out what to do. Regulation will be critical and will take time to figure out. So let me bring us back to our central question. What does this mean for healthcare? This is not an industry known to embrace change quickly, and the cost of errors can be significant. The use cases that are currently being discussed relate to reducing the administrative burden, supporting clinician decision-making, assisting with patient education and patient engagement, and also supplementing medical education. And while these applications can deliver tremendous value, it's critical that we weigh the risks and the benefits. And we focus on deploying the most practical applications first. And to discuss this, we are very fortunate to be joined by 7 senior operating executives and experienced entrepreneurs who will share their perspectives on the role that they see generative AI playing in healthcare. We're excited to be joined by David Rhew, the Global Chief Medical Officer and Vice President of Worldwide Healthcare at Microsoft, Mona Flores, the Global Head of Medical AI at NVIDIA, Ken Mandl, Donald A.B. Lindberg, Professor of Biomedical Informatics and Pediatrics, and the Director of the Computational Health Informatics Program at Boston Children's, Fatima Paruk, Senior Vice President and Chief Health Officer at Salesforce, Brigham Hyde, Co-founder and CEO of Atropos Health, Jack Poe, Founder and CEO of Ansible Health, and Bel Shrikant, Vice President of Product and Design at Suki. We're going to host 3 discussions over the next hour. First will be a fireside chat with David to dig deeper into Microsoft's role as one of the first movers in this space. And then we'll shift to better understand how incumbents like NVIDIA and Boston Children's and Salesforce see this space evolving through a conversation with Mona and Ken and Fatima. And finally, we'll shift to understanding the different white spaces that startups are tackling through a discussion with Brigham and Jack and Bel. So with that, I am going to hand it off to my colleague, Bill, to kick off a conversation with David. Thank you.
Uma, thank you so much. It was a great tee up and excited to spotlight our friend David Rhew. David, great to see you.
Yeah, same here. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you for being with us. A super exciting time for Microsoft. And maybe 2 seconds on your background before we jump right in, as Uma teed up. So you're the Global Chief Medical Officer, VP Worldwide Health at Microsoft. You held a similar role at Samsung before that. You're an adjunct professor at Stanford focused on primary care and population health. And I did a little digging, although GPT came up empty on this. I found that you had written a thesis 35 years ago as an undergraduate at University of Michigan focused on AI and healthcare. I went looking for that thesis. I wrote an undergrad thesis too, but mine was on accounting for revenue recognition. So somehow our different paths have led us to this point in our friendship, but yours is much more interesting. But let's jump right in. In 2019, I think it was a pretty risky bet for Microsoft to put $1 billion into OpenAI, obviously with 10 billion more recently in. Those who thought Microsoft was slipping and lost its number 1, 2, or 3 position, maybe it was now number 4, 5, or 6 in tech companies. Microsoft is back. And the conversation around GPT, of course, is central to that. So let's start with this. I remember, a number of us remember IBM's failed Watson Health experiment. And Watson did a good job on a TV game show and maybe a good job on some standardized tests. But what lessons can be learned from Watson Health? Where and why did it fail? Why is the time right now? And how is GPT different?
Yeah, fantastic question. And I think one of the things we have seen is that AI continues to advance to the point where it is doing things much more closer to human behavior, and it's also exceeding that in many regards. We think about AI starting out as maybe some advanced algorithms. And then when Watson came out, we had the capabilities to do machine learning. And a lot of that was like learning from those data sets. But we also recognize that there were not as many data sets as we'd like to have access to. So this is one of the challenges that we faced at the time when Watson was out. We've since then continued to evolve. We now have deep learning with these complex neural networks and generative AI, which is fairly new. It's really based on this concept of anticipating the next word. So we're looking more at language as a means to be able to identify and be able to create new content. And it creates not new content, not just in text, but also in terms of images and in code and a variety of other areas. So it's extraordinary in its capabilities. And it's extraordinary in terms of the amount of data that it can synthesize to be able to then generate that new content. So this is really a part of the challenges that we look historically that certain technologies were adopted, but they had different capabilities and different tool sets back then. But the other thing we've also realized is that with AI, we have to put in guardrails. We have to start thinking about how it's responsibly used. And there's a lot of things that we've been doing to make sure that people know that as we implement AI, that we think about the transparency, the ability for us to be able to make sure it's explainable, to remove the bias, to be able to understand the risks. And there's a lot of safeguards that we can apply even within this world of ChatGPT.
No, that's great. And I want to come back to the safeguards. It's super, super important. I want to come back to the training set as well, which is so core, right, to making this better and better. But what are the top 3, 4, 5 applications in healthcare that you're most focused on?
Yeah, so when I think about the opportunities, I tend to think about it in terms of 2 axes. One, in terms of the impact it makes. So maybe let's call it low, medium, and high impact. And then the risk involved, and risk being essentially your comfort level with an error. And if certain times that there's an opportunity where you'd say, hey, you know what? I can't be wrong. There's no way that this answer can be wrong. And then what are the mechanisms that you're going to put in place to ensure that those errors are minimized? And as we think through that, there are some use cases that I would say are fairly high impact, low risk, largely when you have administrative things that clinicians and other individuals are doing, and you're making it easier, faster. But at the same time, you're putting the clinician in the control of the decision. So we call this co-piloting, where you've got a co-pilot that's helping you, but there's not taking over the role. And that is where we're going to find a significant amount of benefit and opportunity where we can start.
So will it always be true? Will there be a clinician in the loop? Is that kind of an essential requirement? Some people may bristle at the fact that errors can be tolerated in healthcare when we all think there's no way that errors can be tolerated in healthcare in these kinds of solutions. And so how do you think about the clinician in the loop, and how does that change over time?
Keep in mind that a lot of things may or may not involve clinicians. So I would say a human in the loop would probably be the more general term that I would use. But yeah, irrespective of whatever technology we're using, at this point, we want to make sure that we've minimized the risk of error and potential harm. And in certain scenarios, just based on the context of what's being done, that can be done in a way that the technology can do the majority of the work. But yeah, I think in healthcare, as a general rule of thumb, we want that human in the loop. We want to put in a variety of different processes to ensure that the quality of the information is at the highest level. I think most of us are familiar with the consumer version of ChatGPT, where you go to the internet and you're searching the internet based on information that's out there, and it could be good, it could be bad, who knows? But there's also what we'll refer to as an enterprise version. So as organizations think about how to responsibly use this, they may have their own data sets that they want to apply. And in applying that within this context of you defining your own data sets, running through and being able to provide that gives us greater confidence that the information that's being presented is of highest fidelity. But you're still going to want to have that human in the loop just to verify that things are not off base. Another thing that I don't think people even realize is that there's something called temperature, that when you look at LLMs, you can set the temperature to what we refer to as either 0 or 1. 0 being that it doesn't tolerate or tries to minimize as much of its making up stuff. And then 1 where it's very creative. And sometimes that's what you want in some of these scenarios. You want creativity. You want them to start thinking about different ways, and you can set it to that. So you can actually control some of these parameters that people are looking at. And that's going to be important as we go through this prompting, setting the temperature, setting the opportunities to define the user sets. That will allow us to be able to create higher fidelity outputs.
David, that's great. I think prompting and temperature is a great segue to the guardrails, which you mentioned earlier. Microsoft is a part of a number of coalitions, one of which includes our friends at Cleveland Clinic, another, our friends at Mayo Clinic. So let's dive a little bit deeper with regard to guardrails. How are you ensuring that people understand what it means to adjust temperature, what it means with respect to accuracy versus creativity, and kind of the openness of the black box and the data on which it was trained?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have tried to do is to educate people about what we're seeing and hearing, but also incorporating that into all the products and all the services that we deliver. For instance, you may have heard that Microsoft has been incorporating a lot of these capabilities within its products, whether it be within Dynamics or whether it be Teams. And there's a lot of different applications that can be done.
Outlook 360, PowerPoint,
exactly.
Word, Excel included.
You name it. These are fantastic tools that we use every day, but now can be made even better. But to do that, what we had to do is we had to make sure that we applied all the rules of responsible AI into everything that we did. We also have tools that can assess AI in general for bias, and we talk about governance and the process for how we need to ensure that the AI is properly applied in the real world. And so there's a lot that we are, I'd say, on the early stages of trying to discover about how to best apply it. But as much as possible, we want to incorporate them into what we currently do and what others do as well.
Got it. And David, how will you be supporting the early stage community, the startup community, young emerging tech companies that are building on top of these LLMs, on top of GPT? What's Microsoft's role, and how do you see it expanding in that regard?
Well, this is an area where we have, first of all, a lot of interest in supporting companies of small, medium, and large size. We have a program for startups. We have programs to help support enterprise customers. And as I mentioned before, we envision that this tool set can be used within an enterprise version in a slightly different way by managing the data sets that it controls, so the corpus of information that it reviews will be put into that. We also would provide some suggestions and advice in terms of things that they may want to consider as they start rolling it out. Use cases that are, we'll call, like I mentioned, low risk, high impact. So let's start with those. And let's not try to do the most complicated things first, because there's a lot of challenges with going to the harder ones first. So let's get some familiarity of how to use it. And even with those low risk, high impact ones, there's going to be a significant amount of training that's going to have to occur on the models. We're probably going to have to put in a bunch of prompts and different settings. And then ultimately, we're going to have to test it to make sure that it's doing as designed before we release it to not only internal, but also external clients.
And what are some of those enterprise kind of cost reduction applications in healthcare specifically that you think might be early test beds for the solution?
I've seen and heard some really interesting use cases that I personally think are really impactful. One of them, I was talking to a chief medical officer, and they were sharing with me how within a hospital, they've got teams that review charts, and they read the charts, and they're looking for certain pieces of information. And the rate limiting step is the number of people they have to read charts. That's a perfect example of how you can apply this type of technology to be able to help them perform their jobs better, faster. So essentially, you're scaling that team and their capability. That would be a fantastic opportunity. I've heard in terms of being able to take information that is currently standardized and then present it back to individuals in their language at the grade level that they would understand it. So these are complex concepts. That's a fantastic opportunity for us to think about how we can democratize this information and enable patients and other individuals to really understand what these topics mean. And that is something that we struggle with today as we think about health literacy and opportunities for people to really understand their treatments. So this is another fantastic use case. I think, and this is really interesting for me, when I think of researchers, I think of them in the lab or doing some amazing things, all focused on discovery of the actual next molecule or the next type of chemical reaction. I don't actually realize, and I hadn't even come to my attention, that they spend a lot of time just trying to explain their work to others, applying for grants, trying to explain what this all means, writing it all up into a way that they can put. So this is another great way to take these complex documents and synthesize it into things that people can do on a regular, everyday basis. So think about like all the administrative things that we have to do to get our jobs or to do our work. If we could find a way to make that faster, easier, better, that's going to become a great way for us to become much more effective in the jobs that we do.
David, touch a little bit more on the health equity aspect here. I know that's something that's important to you and your organization, but go a little deeper too as to how GPT could play a role with respect to health equity.
Health equity is about providing access to care for everyone and allowing them to be able to achieve the health benefits from that access. When we think about the challenges that individuals have, it stems from, one, the ability to get that information in a way that they can understand it in the language they understand it. So language translation is probably one of the very first things that we would think of. Education, certain types of documents and certain types of things are not designed for the layperson. And what we find is that people have different needs. So to be able to have levels of customization, that certainly is an element of how GTP can be very helpful. I think that there's many strategies for how this can be applied in terms of bringing it into clinical workflows that we would be really exciting to see. I think that the challenge with health equity is that you have to have multiple different stakeholders all working together in a coordinated manner to deliver healthcare services, and that the data needs to be somehow managed appropriately. If we have tools that make it easier for individuals that don't have the skill sets and the knowledge to be able to perform or at the top of their license or even perform above and beyond because they've got this information, you've now enabled a new workforce that can help deliver some of this care in collaboration with the healthcare partners that they have.
That's great. That's exciting, David. And said, maybe in the final 2 minutes, we have lots of other tech companies I want to touch on, kind of competition and differentiation, but certainly Google, Meta, Salesforce, others have announced or working on generative AI applications. And so I'm curious as to how you compare and contrast Microsoft's positioning with respect to a number of those large tech companies.
Yes, this is a really exciting time. We're all recognizing that large language models, generative AI, can do so much more than we had originally envisioned. And it's opportunities for us to create different and unique ways of approaching this. We may find some levels of specialization require deeper investment in terms of resources and understanding of how we can better build these. We're going to find that different partners will approach things slightly differently. So from my perspective, it's an opportunity for us to be able to take what we currently know and build an ecosystem of different types of applications. And I think you'll find that the things that Microsoft's going to be doing will probably be very helpful for the areas that we focus on, largely on the enterprise side. And then you're going to see, I'd say, a large number of consumer-driven types of activities that will be done through the OpenAI partnership that we have. In general, the more that individuals are able to utilize and better understand this, and the more that we can share our best practices, I think that it's better for the industry.
That's great. David, thanks so much. We appreciate being part of your ecosystem as well. And we'll see you soon in Boston in April next month. Thanks again, David, for being with us today. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you soon. And now I turn it over to my partner, Michael, who has an exciting panel ahead. So Michael, over to you.
Hey, terrific, Bill. And thanks, David. What a great setup for the group that we've assembled for this next session. And while they're coming to the stage, as Uma said, we have three terrific representatives of either incumbents or providers to talk about some use cases and the risks and opportunities for these new platforms. Mona Flores is Global Head of Medical AI at NVIDIA. Welcome, Mona. Ken Mandl, good friend of mine at Boston Children's, an important partner of our firms. And Ken has been in around this space for more years than probably we both want to count. And then Fatima Paruk at Salesforce, SVP and Chief Health Officer. So thank you so much for this. All of you individually and your organizations are right in the middle of this vortex, this phenomenon. And in the few minutes that we have together, I wanted to try and tease out some of the initiatives that each of you are most excited about, initially focusing on some use cases. And Mona, maybe I'll start with you first. Obviously, NVIDIA is building a lot of this core infrastructure. Analysts refer to your chips as, quote, the currency of these new platforms. Maybe from your perspective, just comment on what you think your role is in the global healthcare landscape, the products you're bringing to market. Give some context to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. And can you hear me okay?
Terrific.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. NVIDIA is at the foundation of this generative AI movement. And the reason that we are there is you can think of us as a company that has all of these chips that accelerate AI and that are almost form-fit to build these generative AI models. But I think more important than the chips is that NVIDIA has a whole stack that could be used in order to build and generate AI models that can help in healthcare, from whether it is drug discovery and finding new medicines for diseases all the way to the edge at the bedside. I just left NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen, who was giving the keynote, and he announced three things that I think are pretty important in moving generative AI forward. And one of them was a new inference platform, or actually 4 inference platforms that allow people to use generative AI faster and in a very optimized and in a very efficient way. The second one, which is really exciting here, obviously we have foundational models today from text generation like Nemo to a new one that he announced called Picasso for image, for 3D asset generation, for video generation. But what's really exciting is actually he announced a NVIDIA foundation service called BioNemo. And BioNemo, if you think of the name, is combining language models with biology. BioNemo is a service that has today 9 different models. There's going to be more in the future. And these models allow you to predict protein structure. They allow you to generate new molecules with specific features. They allow you to do docking and look at the ligand and the protein and make sure you have the most you're able to predict where the binding is going to occur and how strong. So all of those models today are available through this BioNemo service, which you can access through another announcement of Jensen today, which is our DGX Cloud. And DGX Cloud is basically giving you access to a supercomputer right away. You don't have to go and build it. You don't have to have your data center. You're able to access these supercomputers and run the BioNemo service over there in order to accelerate biology and accelerate scientific discovery.
And Mona, is the implication that you're bringing new capabilities to the market, or you're taking existing capabilities and making them better? Will this be truly novel solutions for the benchtop scientist, for instance?
I think what makes it really novel is not just acceleration, but also customizable. David talked about guardrails earlier. Now these companies can go and bring their own, or take what the models that we have and bring their own in order to make the model more pertinent to their solutions, and in order to put the guardrails to make sure these models are performing in a safe and secure and efficient way, and that they are domain specific, so that as it's generating answers, it is constrained to whatever domain you want it to be, which makes it obviously better performing.
And let me switch over to you, Fatima. Obviously, Salesforce, a number of important announcements, a $250 million fund now focused on generative AI, which we think is super exciting. ChatGPT app for Slack, Einstein GPT, on and on. Just maybe comment from your vantage point, where are you playing in this new world order?
Yeah, Salesforce is known, obviously, as the #1 CRM in the world, right? Specifically to healthcare. We're thinking about it from helping health systems, payers, all of our different organizations analyze and manage the patient interaction, right? So we see this as key to the future. And we've, as you said, made the investments, right? Making sure that ChatGPT, for example, has been integrated right with our core platform. So integration of Einstein and ChatGPT, for example, into our product. Thank you, David Rhew, firstly, for a lot of that work that's ongoing. But from a Salesforce perspective, again, we truly understand what it is going to take to engage and change patient and consumer behavior. And we're just taking that and applying that to achieving on the quintuple aim and achieving optimal health outcomes. So as we think a little bit more about perhaps the more mobile workforce, right? That was one of the ideas that we wanted to explore a little bit. I think clinician burnout and improving that provider experience through whether it's a hybrid work approach, right? And thinking about how we might take Slack and improve on that experience, or figuring out how to just make some of the administrative tasks that we deal with on a day-to-day basis much easier and more intuitive. We think that we can actually just improve that clinician burnout and clinician shortage problem. There's also some really interesting use cases coming out as it relates to onboarding and training. If we can figure out how to onboard new providers into hospital and healthcare organizations quicker and make this process just much easier for them, we think that will lead to increased retention and, again, just a much more positive experience for the individual. And so, as we know, like, again, we're having a major shortage of clinicians in the system right now. And if we can do something there to alleviate that burden as folks onboard and stay engaged, I think that will go a really long way.
And maybe before we get the provider, just on some of those use cases, is that capability robust enough today, or is that a future state?
I think there's always room to improve, right? We haven't solved this, and it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us from wherever we're coming from in the field. It's going to take a heck of a lot of collaboration. This is not something that we got into overnight, and it's certainly not something we're going to get out of overnight either, right? And so I think it's going to take improved, again, just collaboration. We've got a long way to go before we fix a lot of these problems. I think it comes down to one step at a time.
And what do you think, before we have the provider perspective, what will the patient experience, how will that evolve in the next 6 to 12 months? Take us to the bedside. Where do you see that interface?
At the bedside today, patients are seeing value in the personalized experiences that they're getting. We know that 3/4 of consumers as patients, and empowered patients, quite frankly, expect this at this point, and they would actually switch providers for a better experience, better decision-making capacity for this empowered patient and consumer. I think we can start moving the needle on better outcomes. We can provide things like patient education material that's relevant and actionable. We can ensure that we're helping patients to wayfind, whether it is coming up with the best possible providers that are matched to them and their needs, taking into account who they are, the languages they speak, whatever it is that makes them an individual, navigating that healthcare system, and figure out how to give them real value on the data that they're sharing with us, right? As they think about their experience, I think that's what's going to change how we deliver care and create more, just better, more engaged patients that are more likely to adhere to care plans that, again, are personalized for them and drive those better outcomes that we all keep talking about.
All right, point counterpoint, Ken, as a provider, how realistic do you think some of these new technologies will be?
I think there are expectations that are changing rapidly, and predicting the future at a chaotic moment like this is difficult. I had a conversation in my series with Ray Kurzweil just a few weeks ago, and he's holding to his prediction that we get to the singularity where computing and equals the intelligence of humans by 2029. Now that is very soon. And other experts have walked their predictions back from 1,000 years from 2029 to 100 years from 2029 to 2030 also. So we're coming to a point where things are going to really change. At the same time, just today, interestingly, in the wake of a pre-chat GPT survey that a fellow working with me, Charlotte Blees, administered to medical students, 50% of them thought that AI and ML would not have too big an impact on general practice. Okay, that was just published today. Great timing. So we've got this. People have not been prepared for this, to think of it. There are some dogma that are going to be challenged quickly. And I hear them still being stated that no doctor will trust any AI that's not explainable. If ChatGPT gives you the answer that you need to take care of that patient, I think explainability is going to dissolve away very quickly as a prerequisite, particularly as it gets built in, as we can see, into these workflows. Whether
And
it's,
so,
yes.
sorry, Ken. So the guardrails that David alluded to, who's responsible for that? Is
Well,
that the vendors, or is that going to be around the providers? Who owns that obligation?
That is a tough question, because the cat is out of the bag, because this is available to patients also. And in 2006 in the BMJ was published a really stunning small measurement, which is that Google in 2006, before Google had a healthcare division, Google, just putting in the symptoms and signs that you had, got the diagnosis correct 50% of the time. It was in 2006, untrained on health data, unoptimized for healthcare questions.
And so let me ask that question maybe of our other panelists, Fatima or Mona. Who do you think owns the responsibility to ensure the integrity of these products, that they're unbiased, that they're accurate? How do you think about your roles in that? And where I'm also going to want to go to is the role of startups to help you with that. But how is that?
I think we all have a role here. I think it's incredibly important as we think about this stuff to make sure that we all are taking action to ensure that we're reducing bias. And the first rule of medicine is first do no harm. And so I think we have to think about this very consciously and intentionally. We must always have this foundation of inclusivity and trust. And again, the patient and the provider both have to see the value, and they are seeing the value. And so I think some of this focus on it goes away, but we all certainly have the responsibility. This goes down even to the people as it relates to the processes, right? We're thinking about training a lot of these models when you think about healthcare data and so on. And these models do have to be refined, but that means that there have to be people from diverse backgrounds, right? Looking at this stuff. I often reference the story of when I was first starting out in this space, maybe 7, 8, 10 years ago. And we started looking at longitudinal health data on a subset of patients who developed diabetes very rapidly over a 6-month period. And they gained a whole lot of weight. And lo and behold, they were all women, and they were all in their 20 to 40-year-old sort of age range. And I had this phenomenal team of young male white data scientists. And I was like, guys, do you think that could be something called gestational diabetes? But it would never have occurred to them because they just didn't have that perspective on life and thinking about the other 50% of the population.
Isn't the paradox that products are being released today without a sense of ownership of these biases? And maybe Mona, just given we only have 2 more minutes, where do you see the responsibility lies? And maybe quickly comment on the roles of regulators. Would you want to see this be more of a regulated sector of this industry?
I think I agree with Fatima. I think the onus is on all of us to be able to make sure that these are used, that AI and these models are used in a safe way and in an acceptable way, but also in developing these models in a safe way and making sure that we use data that is worthwhile and keeping the data private, but also making sure that the data is sourced ethically, if you may. The regulators for sure will have to take a role in this. And we don't forget AI, any medical device today, any treatment. You need the FDA to look at the studies and to make sure that it is safe before it's released to the public. AI is no different, especially if it's going to touch patients. We will need regulators. We will need companies who are making the technology. We are going to need providers. We're going to need patients to all weigh in and make sure that what we are providing is something that can be used responsibly. AI is a double-edged sword. You can use it for bad, but I hope that we use it for good.
And Ken, maybe last word, you spent a lot of time in DC, as I know. How do you think about the future state, near-term future state of these products from a regulatory standpoint? Because they're in the wild now, as you said, they're being used.
They're in the wild, and I think there will be attempt to develop regulatory guidelines. But when I look at how software as a medical device has been regulated, it's been slow going with some starts and stops and some successes, but not a big cheer around a particular success in that area. This is much more free ranging. And even if we have a regulated version of it, that's, let's say, being delivered through a service from a company that makes it into the doctor-patient interaction, there will also be the in the wild version of it, the Google, the Bing, et cetera, just right next to it in the same screen. And how people will use this, I think, is something we have to acknowledge. And we really have to start to, I hope the health system really comes in as leaders in training, and medical schools really start to take this on. How do you use this responsibly? And how can we, within the healthcare system, learn this essential tool that's going to be as essential as the other tools in our toolkit now?
Terrific. Hey, we're at time. Thank you. I want to reconvene this for twice as much time in a year from now and see how we're doing. But thank you to the three of you. I'm going to turn it back over to Uma, who has a terrific group of entrepreneurs who are trying to capitalize on this moment. Uma, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And thanks to our panelists. Brigham, Jack, and Belle, thank you so much for joining us. We are super excited to be able to have Ansible Health, Atropos Health, and Suki on this panel. We view these as three companies that are tackling some really fascinating white spaces here. And I think it might be helpful for our audience if we just begin with some background on each of yourselves, and also just take us one step deeper so that we can learn a bit more about each of your companies. So maybe beginning with you, Jack, what does Ansible Health do? And you recently had ChatGPT take the USMLE. So would love to just understand how this informed your approach to building Ansible, and also if the release of GPT-4 has had any influence on your strategy. So over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Uma, and thanks for inviting me. My name is Jack, as Uma suggested. I did my MD and PhD at Columbia, and I actually spent most of the last 10 years at Google before starting Ansible Health around 2 years ago. That was my hopefully quick intro. We at Ansible Health is first and foremost an actual medical practice. So we actually take care of high acuity patients who have chronic respiratory disease. So the majority of our patients have diseases such as COPD, very severe asthma. These patients get admitted once, twice a year. Some of our patients get admitted 10, 20 times a year. So these are very sick patients. And what we do in the practice is we actually use every tool that we know of, whether it's AI, whether it's hardware tools, in order to try and improve the clinical outcomes and quality of life of these patients. So that means that we've actually been using tech since the inception of the company. And ChatGPT, when it came along, was just a really interesting tech that we also decided to look at and see how well it performs. When it first came out, there was a lot of hype, not just in health. There was a lot of hype across the entire tech ecosystem. And we, of course, could not use our own patients' data to test it, given that OpenAI at the time actually continues to mostly not be HIPAA compliant. So we decided to figure out a data set where we could start to benchmark how well ChatGPT is doing, which is how we came up with using USMLE, which is for those who have never heard the acronym, it is the licensing exam that we use in the United States to license physicians. So we were honestly pretty shocked at the results. We've been testing tools, NLP, natural language processing. We've been testing lots of AI tools for the last 2-3 years, and nothing even comes close to this performance. So it was really quite amazing, and we are actually starting to use it across a lot of our ecosystem. And I'll talk a lot more about GPT-4 and other things later.
No, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Jack. And over to you next, Brigham. Would love to hear a bit more about what Atropos Health is doing. And you also recently announced partnerships with Syntegra and Omni and Mayo Clinic. Would love to hear a bit of color on how you target ideal partners for your business to scale with.
Yeah, thanks, Uma, and thanks for having me today. Brigham, Hyde, CEO and co-founder at Atropos Health. We're spun out of Stanford University and what was originally called the Green Button Project within Stanford. Very simply, trying to provide real-world evidence personalized to the patient in care, back to the physician treating that patient, and do that extremely quickly. To describe a little bit more about what we do and our partnership structure, let me make 3 points about generative AI from the seat we're in. The first thing is, I would say all of us need to recognize that user experience has fundamentally changed in search. It's over, it's happened. And I think if you look at the adoption of ChatGPT, the fastest growing website, all these things, I think the standard for user experience is fundamentally different. That's something we believe at Atropos. And when we work with physicians or patients and caregivers, we provide a simple chat interface. You should be able to just ask a question like you're talking to a colleague. And we believe that ChatGPT-4 and others are reinforcing that dynamic, as well as providing a summarized and contextualized output that's easy to understand and ideally transparent, I would add. So I think that number one has happened. We all need to act and build companies as if that's the new truth. And I think that has huge implications from the ideas of chatbots to SEO to marketing and advertising. I think that we'll see throughout all of our businesses, but really across the board. And I think that's a good thing because user experience for physicians hasn't always been great. So there's a chance that maybe this helps drive that in the future. Second thing I'll say, which from our seat in Atropos, we sit on millions of patient records. The partners you described are all great data set partners for us that allow us to provide the best insight and the best data sets. And my biggest challenge with ChatGPT to date is that LLMs are largely trained on published literature in the health sciences, right? The clinical trials, the articles, maybe the popular journalism or editorial, and they're great at it. But here's a fundamental flaw. We know right now that we don't have enough evidence for patient care. Most patients are excluded from clinical trials almost systematically. Nearly 70% of the treatable population wouldn't be able to participate in a trial, yet that evidence is what drives the training for LLMs. So when you expect ChatGPT-4 to give you an accurate answer, and they don't have evidence to train on, where are they supposed to go? There's another big place for Atropos. So we generate de novo evidence based on, again, that chat interface. We do it on millions of patient records, and we're filling the content gap that exists around this evidence. So not only do we do that every day as we get requests, but we also pre-train study designs that are producing tens of thousands of studies every month now that we think could actually be fuel for these LLM models to train on. Jack mentioned the article where they were able to get it to pass USMLE. By the way, great use, right? There's a ton of published textbooks. One of his co-authors, Morgan Cheatham, is actually working on a paper right now with us where we're taking questions we got from the point of care from doctors and seeing if ChatGPT could answer it versus what we're able to produce based on patient-level observational research. It's not done, but I would tell you that ChatGPT sometimes fairly says, there's not enough evidence for this question. I'm here to say there could be. And the last thing I'll lead is just a forward-looking view. Again, with LLMs, we're largely training on language models, talking about text. What we're really excited about is what if you could talk to a database, right? And we've seen ChatGPT produce code, right? And our interface, which we call ACE and our language TQL, we believe you can go from text to database queries. So instead of saying, what was the infection rate of COVID last month and relying on a PR release from the CDC, what if you could query the CDC database and get a statistically backed answer? That's a super interesting area because now we're getting into fidelity of data. We're getting the best data sources to help feed those models. So just a couple of areas worth thinking about as this runs through.
Really helpful, Brigham. And I certainly do have some follow-up questions. You touched on a few topics related to the quality of data, so would love to get back to that in a few minutes. But Belle, over to you now. Can you share a little bit more about what Suki is doing, and also what near-term and long-term opportunities for Suki and other AI-powered voice assistants to integrate generative AI to reduce the administrative burden?
Hey, thanks, Uma. It's wonderful to be here, and thanks for having me over. At Suki, I lead product management and design. But before that, I spent about 15 years at Google on search and cloud technologies and artificial intelligence. So what does Suki do? So think of Suki as a digital voice assistant, just like an Alexa or a Siri, but for doctors to help save on their tedious administrative tasks. I think studies have shown that for every hour of patient care, doctors spend about 2 hours on administrative work. And that's crazy. It's a huge productivity loss. So doctors use Suki for a variety of things, for clinical documentation, to ask questions, to get diagnosis coding, and so on and so forth. And doctors interact with Suki in a natural voice, in natural language. Suki works not as a separate device, but just on their desktop, mobile, web, any form factor that they're already used to. And Suki also integrates directly with the electronic medical record systems. So doctors can complete their workflows without having to do this only in the mobile application. The data is written seamlessly to their systems of records. Uma, you asked me about the opportunities with generative AI. Actually, in Suki, we have been using language models for almost 2 years now, even before all the recent buzz for our natural language processing in our command engine and our dictation engine. And I think we would continue to do the same thing, but the assistant would be more and more human-like. And given the amount of administrative overheads, I think doctors, nurses, residents, all of these professionals have, the opportunities, in my view, for voice assistant to use generative AI is actually boundless. And we have not scratched the surface of what's possible. For example, in Suki, we are working on some of these, and I'm sure others as well, which is AI can help in summarizing long-form conversations between doctors and patients. It can help in recommending sections of their clinical notes from these narratives. There are so many forms that doctors have to fill. It could be intake forms, medication form, discharge summaries, lab orders, you name it. And AI can really help doctors do this with much lesser effort in a natural and a seamless manner. But I also think AI can help answer questions about their schedule, about patients, and even latest clinical research. But as Brigham was also mentioning, it's obvious that it's important that AI is used in a privacy safe, secure, and a responsible manner, and is compliant in the medical settings. So that's what we are up to.
No, really appreciate you sharing that, Belle. And I'd love to shift the conversation a little bit to focus on data quality, a topic that Brigham, you had alluded to. High quality data, as we know, is critical in training these generative AI models. And when low quality data is used, then it affects the value of the output that is produced. So Brigham, there's been a lot of discussion around the relevance of the training data set, and that can be defined in a few different ways. One of them is how current the data is. So ChatGPT, for example, is trained on data through September 2021. The COVID pandemic wasn't included in that data, then the quality or the relevance of that data might be different. And another topic that you had brought up earlier was how representative that data set might be. So I'm curious, with Atropos, how frequently are the model parameters being trained? And how do you ensure that there's relevant, up-to-date clinical evidence that's included in the training data set?
Yeah, we leverage something we call the Atropos Evidence Network. And you mentioned some of our partners. Could be the institution we're working with. Oftentimes their local data is most important. How do we do medicine here? Other times you might need a specialty data set like ASCO Cancer Link, which has rich oncology data, or Mayo Clinic, which enriches their data significantly through NLP and other techniques. Our role, we see, is to be transparent first on what data is being used, its provenance, and what goes into it. And we've actually gone a step further now. We're actually issuing data fitness scores. So let me try to explain what that means. It's kind of like a credit score for data. And what you do is you actually score the relevance of the data being used to the question being asked. And I'd give the example. If I were asking an oncology question, it might be good to have a really rich oncology data set. And this helps users understand not only where the data came from, how relevant is it to my question? It's also a way, if you're a data holder and you're an institution who has built data sets, you're always asking yourself, hey, what can I do to improve my data? And we've got some great folks on the phone who can enrich that data set, NLP and other things. Well, how many more questions would I be relevant to if I ran NLP, right? Or if I curated, or if I had socio-determinants of health. So we actually think it's a critical factor to be transparent on the data being used, its quality for the question being asked, and its provenance. And I think that's got to be the standard. The good news is we're now in a place with cloud compute and federated models where we can do all this safely and securely with data not having to be shipped around, and we can transparently provide that information back. So if you're getting an answer, not only in a ChatGPT sense, do I want a citation? Further than that, I want to know the quality and match of that data set to the question that was asked, and I want that to be understandable. And that's a big focus for us.
Yeah, no, appreciate you sharing that. And we have a few minutes left on the panel. I do want to try to hit on two more questions. Belle, specifically for as these generative AI applications become more popularized, the usage of the models themselves might be less of a differentiator and might be considered more commoditized. So in your opinion, what levers moving forward will be those new sources of differentiation? Is it the workflow? Is it the user experience? Is it the training data? Would love to hear your thoughts here. I think you're on mute, Belle. There we go.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Without data, Uma, there's no AI. In fact, the risk of hallucinations, seemingly confident authoritative responses that are wrong from poorly trained models without guardrails can have a huge negative impact. And in terms of standards, generative AI in a clinical setting is fairly new and there are no gold standards to follow. So in some way, we are setting the standards as we speak. And in my humble opinion, clinicians are the standards. So we have in-house clinicians and a panel of medical experts who help in evaluation and fine-tuning our model and in training and so on. And we also believe, as David was mentioning, that doctors should be in control, review the notes, edit themselves through what we call as enhanced human review before accepting these suggestions. And regarding differentiation opportunities, I think there are many. You're also right, ML models will be commoditized just like infrastructure was commoditized by cloud providers, leveling the playing field. But that, in my humble opinion, will actually spur innovation rather than stifle innovation and encourage more differentiations. Some examples. The most obvious is the source of differentiation is that of data integrations with electronic medical record systems, both for reading and writing seamlessly into them. Completeness of the product from user perspective is another. Let's not make doctors use multiple tools, one for dictation, one for diagnosis coding, one for procedures, one for search, one for ambient, et cetera, et cetera. And thirdly, I think you hinted that as well, more intuitive the experience and fewer things for doctors to learn, higher the chances for adoption. And in Suki, we believe tech does not replace doctors and doctors can review, edit the notes before signing. Lastly, I think strong security measures themselves are a source of differentiation. Use of AI must be compliant, patient data must not be compromised, and it's easy to do that. And AI enables huge opportunities, in my view, both in ML security, ML operations, which are not obvious. So I think there's a lot to be done here. And I think we're just at the beginning of this journey.
Really insightful, Belle. And one last question that I'll pop in with, and that's for Jack. Ansible is using clinicians in the loop, or as David referred to it earlier, humans in the loop. What do you feel is the most effective way to do that?
Yeah, I'll be also a little bit contrarian, I think, to two of your earlier questions. The way that we use large language models in general, not just ChatGPT, is actually a little bit agnostic of data quality, even though we do human in the loop. The way we do it is we actually use these models for its capabilities. It's very good at understanding text, and it's very good at summarizing text, it's very good at querying text. So the way we do it is actually we have little models either before or after these huge models that frankly we can never afford to build. And we just inject data there. And we use human in the loop to clean up the data either in the little models that are before, which allows us to, as folks mentioned, inject relevant data directly into the chain, or after to basically help clean up the data. And as these models actually get more and more complicated, the models that Google and Microsoft and OpenAI are building, it's allowing us to inject more and more information. So just from 3.5 to 4, from ChatGPT to GPT-4, GPT-4 now allows us to inject basically 60 pages of data, as opposed to before it was around 7 pages. So we're getting away with using human in the loop, building tiny models, and just injecting really interesting data and using that bigger capability.
Very helpful context. And I know we're almost at time, but Brigham, Jack, and Bell, this was such a powerful discussion, and I really appreciate you three hopping on. And I'm glad that we got to learn a bit more about Atropos, Ansible, and Suki, and excited to continue to follow these companies. And as our panelists
Thanks,
are
guys.
dropping, thank you.
Thank you.
And as our panelists are dropping, let me conclude this session by thanking all of our guests who were able to join us today and for sharing their time and their insightful perspectives. I know that we covered a lot of ground, but obviously there is still a lot more to talk about. So if you'd be interested in continuing the conversation, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you again for joining, and hope to see you at our 11th Expert Roundtable on June 13th.